This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Good. Hey, I had an idea today. I wanted to show you one of the items. I'm not sure. Have you ever noticed this in my office?
No.
So
it looks like just a little like glass something or other. I'm clearly something's etched on it, but no, I can't read that. And I've never been in your office, so I don't know what it would be.
It's an award. It's the Oracle Magazine Editor's Choice Award, presented to Jim McDonald for 2006 Security Architect of the Year. And so it's got significance for a couple of reasons. One is it's probably the last time I was called a security architect, and the first time. It should have said Customer of the Year because they implemented their customer identity and access management solution. But it got me thinking about okay, that was 20 years ago. That was my first identity and access management project. And I was on the CIAM side of the house. First off, most people had not heard of IAM, much less customer IAM. But I learned so much about, the business and kind of going through some of these use cases that, first off, I didn't even know IAM was the thing myself, right? It was like 2003. And, then we're like, okay, where are users coming from? Well, they should all be in the CRM system. You're the CRM system, you find out, that's not where they all are. And there's definitely no passwords there. And okay, so anyway, I just thought that was kind of cool, given what we're going to be talking about today. Was like, that was actually my origin was on the CIM side. I think a lot of people do the reverse. They start on the in-house IM side and then, wind up having some customer IM experiences. And I kind of went the other way around.
I can get behind that. I feel like there's most people fell into identity. Like they didn't really go out and seek it. It was just kind of like, oh, I guess I'm an identity person. It just happened overnight. And yeah, I would say most people probably got started with workforce. That makes sense to me. I mean, I'm thinking about this is a major award. Did you get is it just the little crystal thing? Did you get a leg lamp or something you could put in your front window and show off to all the neighbors?
I did get something that was fragile, but it was not the leg lamp. No, I got another plaque with a picture. Basically, I took a full page in the Oracle magazine. This was one of their 2006 issues. I got a full page, and they put that in a plaque. Very nice. That was pretty much it. And I got a picture. They actually sent a photographer out to I was working for a company called Ingersoll Rand at the time. And they sent a photographer out to one of our factories. So I stood in the factory and got a picture taken.
As if you were actually on the factory floor, here's Jim McDonald. He's building customer identity and access management. You have a hard hat on or something like that.
I did not have a hard hat on, but that would have been a great idea. I was
cool.
having a good hair day that day. So I think we just went with the hair.
Well, that's the most important thing, right? Got to look good for those press photos.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, hey, one more thing before we move on. Here's one of the other things I have. I'm sure you recognize this. This was our, what do you call it? The door stand for the Identiverse conference where we had the Identity at the Center podcast. And I somehow got this thing home.
Yeah, I have no idea how you got that home.
I have no idea how I got it home. But the funny part was I got it from Las Vegas to Atlanta. And when I was on the last leg of it, I was they have a subway in Atlanta that gets you from terminal to terminal. And if you don't hang on to something, you could go flying. So, when you get to each stop, kind of everybody gets shifted to the side and somebody got shifted right. I could tell she wasn't holding onto a bar. I was like, she's going to fall into me and bend my sign. I just know it. And she bent back, but she didn't bend the sign. So the sign made it. And, I think the significance of this is each conference seems to be getting better and better. I'm really stoked about what's going to happen at the Authenticate conference because I know we've been talking it up. I'd like to talk it up again. The plan is that we're going to be part of the keynote in the morning, the first morning, and we're going to do some version of the Identity at the Center podcast. It's definitely a first for you and I. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're still trying to figure it out. So timing may vary, time slot might vary, but yeah, the idea is that we'll be on stage at the Authenticate conference. It's October 16th to the 18th. It's in Carlsbad, California, which is just north of San Diego. It's on a golf course. Very nice. So yeah, I think we're still kind of figuring out what that will look like. I mean, if I'd love to take ideas, right? If there's ideas for people who are either going to be at Authenticate because they're using our discount code. Yep, we got a discount code, 15% off. IDAC 15 podcast. If you use that, you get 15% off the registration. It's not going to help your golf game, but at least you'll be able to be there and be part of the identity conversations. But I'd love to hear ideas as we kind of start to put this together with the Authenticate team of kind of like, what are the topics? What's the approach? How can we kind of, make this the best experience that we can for people who are there?
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, every time I've been in San Diego, the weather's been just absolutely gorgeous, and I'm expecting no less.
Yeah, well, it's San Diego. It's pretty nice all the time. I used to go to the Catalyst conference in San Diego, and the only reason I went is because it was in San Diego. It was right there, right there on the ocean. It was like perfect. So location matters. That's for sure. I like Seattle. I like Carlsbad too. So I'm excited about that. You started off the conversation kind of talking about customer identity and access management, and we're going to talk about that type of identity and access management today. I'm going to be a little bit nebulous. I'm going to call it CIAM because I'm not sure what the C even stands for at this point. There's a lot of different definitions for it, but we brought in an expert. His name is Cassio Sampaio. He runs product for customer identity at Okta. So maybe that's a hint there of what he thinks of when it calls it CIAM. But welcome to the show, Cassio.
Hi, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and taking time out. I know we're kind of at the end of our days as I kick down the fourth wall a little bit. I've been on the phone all day. I'm sure you have as well. So we're going to talk about customer identity and access management, or maybe there's a different definition for that C. But before we get started, it's the first time on the show. The ritual here is that we like to learn more about people's identity backgrounds when they're first on with us. So can you kind of tell us, how did you get into the identity space? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Yeah, I think like most product people, I guess if you started a couple of decades back, you ended up following a path, like not that you have chosen, but you naturally ended up somewhere in there. My first, going back, I'm going to date myself like now, but I've been working with things related to identity, customer identity for the most part for a long time. My first project back in the days when dial-up access to the internet, like remember US robotics, modems, all of that good stuff. So I helped to build what was the first large-scale dial-up free internet service provider in Brazil. And that was all about Radius, Open LDAP, and all of that really, really like what people look at ancient, like technology today that got me into the identity space. From that point, I always been around it, either like in network security or like something that is related to how do you give permissions, authorization to different constituencies, like in access networks and things like that.
So now you're running product for customer identity. That can certainly be taken a lot of different ways. I will keep it on the up and up so that Mackenzie, who is listening silently in the background, does not get in trouble or get me in trouble or you in trouble. I guess tell me what that means. Like, what's your day-to-day overseeing an identity product, running customer identity? Can you kind of just help people understand kind of like what you actually do in the real world?
Yeah, one of the fascinating aspects of customer identity in particular is that the number of users that you have, or the buyers that you have for that technology, they can come from pretty much any part of the organizations, right? It could be in the marketing org, it could be the product team, it could be the application building, it could be IT managers, or it could be the founder of a startup company that is running like a bunch of different things at the same time. So that diversity of perspectives that you have on a job like mine is great. It's fascinating because you have to understand the entire spectrum of needs that your customers have, because you may be meeting folks from very different parts of the organization. And then as a product person, it's all about multitasking and unblocking people to you making decisions like every time you open your mouth, right? So you have to get accustomed to that notion that people need you to unblock them. Either someone in sales that wants like a specific capability, is that in the product roadmap or not? Someone on your team that wants to decide, do I need to do research on this specific capability, the specific market need? So it's very like diverse, lots of multitasking, lots of calls, as you were saying a little bit like earlier today, but never a dull moment.
How do you manage demand from, customers? Because I'm sure if they're like me, they got 1,000 great ideas that they think is really a great idea, but maybe it isn't the best strategic use of time or something like that. I don't want you to name and shame or anything. It's nothing like that, but I'm just curious. I'm sure you get lots of feedback, right? Okta's a very big company, and I think you came over as part of like the Auth0, which is another big company, right? People always have good ideas. How do you sift through what you're getting and saying, yeah, that's something we want to pursue? Is it help me, understand that kind of mindset?
Oh yeah, there's a lot to that. I think fundamentally, first you have to have conviction. Right? You have to establish like what you march, what is your North Star, and that's the first. So the first question that you ask, like as to your point, you're gonna have you have the large enterprise like customer. They'll have a laundry list of potential asks, and in our business in particular, we have a very healthy product-led growth. So like there's a self-serve component to our business where users can sign up and get like a free account or a relatively small dollar amount account, and also start to use the product. So it's how do you bring feedback from all of these different like sources, align them to your North Star, and be very deliberate about saying no, because a lot of ideas may be great, but do they satisfy the majority of your market needs? Because it's not like your customers are going to bring up an idea that doesn't make any sense. Like it makes sense, but otherwise they would be asking but does that align to your vision? And does he help to move like the needle for like a large percentage of your install base? I think that lens is very, very, very important.
So let's talk a little bit about the acronym CIAM. Obviously, the C, well, let's start with the obvious. The obvious is Identity and Access Management, IAM. The C, I'm not so sure on, because I hear customer, I hear consumer, I hear constituent, civic, citizen. There's probably a whole bunch of other C words that I haven't, kind of come up with. But how do you define a CIAM? Is it customer identity? Because that's, how I kind of introduced you, but maybe it's something that flexes in between based on who you're talking to, or do you have a different take on it?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to I guess to outline what the umbrella. It's an umbrella of use cases that fall under that category. And like a lot of things in life, sometimes it's easier to define it by sort of like negating like what it's not, and you typically say, oh, it's all types of identities that are not your employee, like the people that are on your payroll, the people that have a directly employment relationship with that. But that would be too narrow of a definition. So the way that I see customer identity, you essentially helping people that are building applications, websites. They're building some type of technology that has a need to handle like different individuals that have a customer relationship like with you. That customer relationship could be the point that you made, not necessarily a customer in terms of purchasing goods, because it could be a citizen like too, right? But they do have the relationship that they are coming in order to access a service, consumer service, purchase goods. So that would fall under that notion, that construct of roughly what we call consumer apps, like in Okta terminology. But you also have the other part that it's actually more complex and potentially much more interested from the technology point of view, which is this B2B to something, right? It could be a business to an employee, or a business to a consumer, or even to a citizen in there. So in that case, the customer, is a hierarchical problem, right? So for example, Okta, we will sell the technology to a customer that could be a SaaS company. And then that SaaS company is serving their own consumers, or they may be serving other like business customers, so that in turn serve other consumers or employees. So all of that falls under this spectrum, this umbrella of customer identity. So as you can see, like it's not quite well defined as workforce or employee identity, which is you can like touch it, right, and feel it. It's very, very concrete.
Yeah, I feel like the other actually, so Jeff said obviously the IAM, we get that as identity access management, but when I think when you tag the C on the beginning of it, it also brings into question what is the I, what is the identity, and how are you managing that? So I think you brought up a great point about the B2B to X or even just B2B, but like to me, when I look at most CIAM solutions in the marketplace today, they're optimized for B2C, right? They have the authentication, they have the workflows for registration, manage my profile, kind of things like that. When it gets into the B2B, the world and organizations have all solved this problem over time. They built custom applications to manage the I, to access, to allow companies to get access, right? When you have like 100,000 users, centralized administration breaks down. You have to have some way that you can turn that over to the user. If you're in the B2B scenario, it's usually through some kind of delegated administration process. And what I hear a lot of people, IAM practitioners asking me is, okay, who has a solution to solve these problems? And what I tend to find is that most organizations are kind of rolling their own solution for this, right? So they build a solution like an identity side, then they pass that data into, let's call it data store, but the access management side, they're using a product for. Nobody's building their own access management tool anymore. But I still think the majority of organizations out there who are in the B2B realm, at least, not in like e-commerce maybe, but maybe even in e-commerce, they're building at least the front end, building a lot of the business logic for the identity management side. I wanted to throw that back to you because I think that is an interesting nuance that I think that C, what is the C? It's a great question, but I think when you throw that C there, the I is now a different picture, much different than the workforce.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that we see a lot, exactly what you described, when you're building, if you think of yourself as like a classic SaaS company, you sell into a lot of other businesses, you're growing fast. Typically, when you start your company, you don't think of like, okay, let me go and bring an identity product to solve that problem for me. You think of that as just a feature of your user management capability. You don't really like think of just like you would about like a CRM or some other more established technology that you're not going to build, you're going to buy like from day one. And that's what we are seeing is at the end of the day, you still need the I capabilities, right? The ability to allow, if you're a B2B2C like organization, like your customer like needs the sign up flow to be frictionless. Need all the properties of a consumer app in there. But we're introducing this layer like now where you have potentially tens of thousands of customers and they all have their unique configurations in there. And each one of those 10,000 customers in turn may have 10,000 consumers like of their own. So it becomes a much more complex hierarchical problem like that. So at Okta, we call that so we call enterprise readiness, which is a term that's being used like loosely in the industry, like around that notion. But that's sort of the idea is that you become enterprise ready when you are capable of managing like that number of business customers and their customer needs in turn.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of like, back in the day, what the CIAM world looked like was on the access management side, you have your tool to authenticate somebody or authorize somebody. The data would be optimized in an LDAP directory. But when you had to manage the users, it was very much a relational problem. It was, I, Jim McDonald, belong to the organization Identity Center podcast. Identity at the Center may have the contract with your organization that allows Jim McDonald to access certain content or sell certain products or conduct certain, activities on your website. So that relation between Jim and Identity at the Center podcast, we might move the data necessary into a directory, but we're solving a relational problem, right? Especially when it comes to B2C. It's not, hey, Jim McDonald's coming in here. It's Jim McDonald only makes sense to your organization because he's a member, he's associated with one of your customers. So that was my thought there. I also wanted to just throw something out because I think this is something I hear a lot is a lot of people, and I do it myself sometimes, so I'm not being critical, but use the terms internal IAM versus external IAM. And I think that everybody should just try to remove that from their vernacular and from their vocabulary because, internal IAM kind of has this connotation that it's the people that work there. To me, the proper terminology would be workforce IAM. A lot of times, though, people are talking about internal IAM, meaning, okay, it's our internal systems, the systems within our enclave, whatever that means. Versus like external IAM is the systems that are outside of our enclave, not really talking about customers. And then you also have those scenarios where you have applications where internal and external people have access. So I don't know if you run into that description a lot, but I find it just very confusing.
Yeah, I think the last part of what you mentioned there is the one that makes this problem. It's probably very interesting. There are lots of apps that are out there like that could be accessed by someone from outside of the four walls of the organization, right? Like or like an employee could be using the same application like too. Like happens a lot in financial services, like where you may be making an application on behalf like of someone, where you have a point in that engagement, like where both parties are going to be working on the same product, like to approve a certain mortgage application or something to that effect. And then in that case, it becomes a hybrid, like in a sense, it's the same resource, the same application. And now you have individuals from within and outside of the organization trying to get access to. And they're very credible problems like to solve. So while you could think of those problems as very sort of separate, as like a wall in between external and internal, there are places like increasingly like where this problem converges for sure.
I'm listening to this conversation go back and forth, and I was going to ask a really stupid question. Why is CIAM important in today's digital landscape? That's literally what I had written. And I'm not thinking, it's like, how the heck do you even create anything without an identity component? I mean, how would people even consume it? It doesn't matter if it's internal, external, customer, workforce, enterprise, consumer, whatever it may be. I guess, I know it's important. I think it makes sense, obviously, to talk about that. What I would like to understand a little bit more is, are there differences between to butcher Jim's thing of internal, external? I do the same thing. I was like, okay, no, I got to get out of that too. It's workforce or it's enterprise IAM versus, non-workforce or customer. But what are some of the differences between that workforce identity and access management versus the non-workforce identity and access management?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk a lot about this with folks because the technology, sort of the supporting bits of the technology, you can argue they are very similar, right? Could registering someone, like if you go really into the technology using like Open ID Connect, like some of the technology may be similar, but when you think of the use case they're solving, they're like completely orthogonal like to each other. And I think the best way that I think about the distinction there is that in workforce identity, you have like this like birth rights, like you're provisioned into the directory, as Jim like was alluding to. So you hired, someone has vetted you as an employee at the organization. Like when you're born in that directory, there's a whole bunch of things that you have access to, and there's a policy. As an employee, I don't get to choose what is the authentication mechanism I'm going to use my resources. Like in order to work, I have to install a certain thing like on my laptop or use a specific type of like access software, MFA, etc. None of that applies in customer identity. Right? Customer identity, the best way to think about it, I think that's about choice. You want to allow these external entities, as Jim like we use the terminology, like to become, like to create a relationship with you as a brand, like as a consumer company or as anything in that space, and you have to make it simpler, like not too simple, like was simple enough for that to not be a barrier. Like when you think of customer identity, the terms that we've been trying to use for folks to understand, it's about conversion, it's about retention, it's about loyalty, right? None of these things apply like in employee. Sure, you would love your employees to be loyal to you, but it's a different type of loyalty, right? Than a consumer coming back for more, like repeat purchases, the personalization of the consumer experience. All of those things are really what the essence of CIAM speaks to.
You know, Cassio, Jeff and I have been having a lot of conversations lately about kind of some of the foundational authentication standards and authorization standards in our industry, the OpenID Connect, OAuth, SAML. It seems like to me they've kind of taken the day. I'd like to hear what you have to say on like the importance of those standards, where they fall short, and things like that. But I also think that, you know, I guess we've all seen this over our career, the need to support backward, or let's just be backward compatible to support old forms of authentication, like header based authentication. Those things are really dying away. You know, it used to be like, oh, this was something that you'd have to bridge past to get a new technology in the door. And I'm seeing a lot of clients now that don't even have that legacy footprint anymore. They've actually solved for that, you know, maybe in their last generation of when they went after this problem. Are you seeing the same thing, or do you keep running into having to solve that problem? So first question was around the standards and, you know, how much of a game changer do you think they are? Where do they potentially fall short? But then, you know, with the legacy piece, which I think is so much less important now.
Yeah, no, I think starting with the standards. I mean, if you think of customer identity, like in particular, I mean, auth is sort of king, right? In that space, and uh, I would say that primarily the majority of the customers that we see like out there, prospects of folks that are migrating or adopting that for the first time, it does most of the job. It does most like of the work. If you bring the if you think of how much some of these capabilities called social login, right? The idea that you can like log in with your Facebook account or with your Google, like Apple, etc. It's all based on these standards, and it works really well, right? And you can extend that to other less known social providers. Like if you can have custom ones, it does a really good job at that. Sometimes the standards would, I won't say overreach, but they will go in specific directions that don't end up with incredible adoption. You could argue that some of the FAPI, the financial API, like standards, like fall in that category. In parts of the world that are very regulated, like the European Union, for example, there's no choice. Right? Some of that implementation is top-down, mandated by regulators. But in other parts of the world, the adoption is being lukewarm because regulators haven't like pushed that down, and you're still able to achieve a lot of the same capabilities like using non-standard components. And then you could go into the whole verifiable credentials like world that is also different standards like competing like for who's going to be the de facto like standard, like if you will, on that front. But yeah, that's on on that. And then the second part of your question, I think it's, if you think of I think it's that the difference between, do I as a company, do I have a lot of legacy? Like if I'm a 30, 40, 50, 100-year-old organization in there and with a lot of on-premises capabilities, etc., then these things they die really hard, right? Like we've been talking about I don't know, I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, radius. I would like radius to be something that is in history, in the past. Like it's still deployed in so many places out there. So we still see it a lot. That being said, though, because of this incredible growth that happened over the past 20 years around software as a service, SaaS companies arguably become the largest tech companies in the world over the past 20 years. They are new organizations, right? Newer, if you will. So they were built, a lot of them were built in the cloud only. And we built our app in the cloud only. Some of those principles like just don't translate. You don't have those challenges. So we are seeing over time more of the sort of former type of companies are becoming more of the norm versus the more traditional organizations. But you can't deny that those problems still exist. There's loads of header-based authentication like out there for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the whole log in with your Google, log in with. I don't see Facebook as much anymore. It's like Google, Apple, or Microsoft, and to me, it's just like, man, when I see that for something that I have that lower level of affiliation with, I want to use that, right? I wouldn't want to use that for my banking because I do feel like the more decentralized that authentication process is, there's a potential for, you know, hijacking my account. But put that aside, I think that if I want to go and buy, you know, a Yeti cup or something like that, I don't want to create an account if I don't have to. I want to, you know, be able to leverage the account, one of the accounts that I already have to do that. But if I'm talking about doing my banking and the bank wants me to create an account and a multi-factor authentication and all of those things, I don't mind doing that, and I will do that. But I wanted to ask you a question, and like, hopefully this is an okay question for you, right? Because we typically don't want the Identity at the Center podcast to be like an infomercial. But what I wanted to do is ask about, like, okay, with Okta and Auth0 coming together, you've got employee, workforce cloud and customer cloud, right? And so even the workforce cloud, like, I think there was a time where Okta and Auth0 would compete in this space, where you'd have, you know, basically similar functionality. But I think now Okta said, all right, Auth0 is the customer cloud. So if you're doing CIAM, it's this customer cloud, which used to be Auth0, but there's still this offering within Okta to do the same or similar things. And I feel like, but the approach is different, right? The customer cloud is more like the developer first approach versus Okta's more like the engineering type approach. Do I have that right?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to unpack here. We made this announcement last year, mid-year, I think around like during summertime last year, like where the technology that came from the Auth0 acquisition became what we call Customer Identity Cloud, and the technology that's like was the Okta pre-acquisition as a Workforce Identity Cloud. And the Workforce Identity Cloud has a number of use cases that have partners and supply chain related use cases. If you think about it, right? Like you may have partners that supply or that consume like services, like in a classic B2B system, which is what that workforce pillar is about. And the customer identity serves the two problems that we talked a little bit about earlier: the consumer problem and the SaaS problem. And if you think of those two problems in customer identity, there's always an app being built, right? We talked a lot about this when we are leading to making this announcement and talking to industry analysts. That's this idea that you build customer identity. If you're building customer identity, there is an app or a website like in there. I was used to say apps don't write themselves until ChatGPT came about. Now they do, but like different conversation. But if there's an app being built, there's a customer identity experience being created, you have a development team. You may not have them on your payroll. They may be working for you via an agency, via like a development shop of sorts, but there's always an app which is why we thought like that the angle that you're providing something that helps application building teams succeed was the right angle. And that's why the team started Auth0, like now nearly like a decade ago, was like to help application teams build identity into their technology.
Can we talk a little bit about apps writing themselves? Because I feel like this is a natural segue for me to get into the AI at the center portion of the podcast. We really can't have a conversation about identity without talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. I feel like these are things that have been around for a little bit of while on the customer consumer side because of things like fraud, risk detection, things like that, which I feel like falls more on the ML side of things. It's pattern matching. And I don't know if you feel the same, but I've been saying this for a while now. I feel like my definition of AI changed at the end of 2022, end of last year, when this weird thing called ChatGPT came out, and I started to understand what a large language model is. And now everyone seems to have like, this is sort of like in their plans. What is the role of AI when it comes to CIAM? Because I feel like it's going to evolve beyond just pattern matching and doing fraud and risk things. Help me understand like where your head is at when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to that. And first, I think I'm on the same camp as you in there. I think before large language models became popular through all the work that OpenAI did in there, like AI is being limited to this world of like very sophisticated pattern matching like models, which I mean we use a whole bunch of that in our bot detection, some of our capabilities, and everyone else like does similarly. But I think what's happening with generative AI or large language models, when I use those two terms interchangeably, and it probably is going to annoy the AI listeners like in here, but I'm sorry. Yeah. First is the sophistication of attacks. Like attackers now have access to incredible technology. Like think of how much more sophisticated some of these phishing attacks like are becoming. I can tailor something very nicely, like to my targets, like right now, and have that really perfectly written. In the past, sort of the classic, I inherited $100 million, like someone from Nigeria, like the pings you in there. Now it's going to read in perfect, like written, whatever language that is, Spanish, English, Portuguese, like, or anything like it, right? Now you have that capability like in there, like too. But you also have like something that's been in the news, the ability to solve CAPTCHA, like in a cost has dropped again, right? Like you can pay for like to the farm to farm CAPTCHA resolution like by probably like a tenth of what it was prior to some of these technologies coming about. So what we see is for customer identity in particular, the world has to move like onto and be prepared to deal like with that new is the same surface area, but potentially the costs like of for attackers have dropped significantly. So there's a lot of experimentation. We have some of ours like internally too, and how do we use some generative AI in terms of providing challenges that only humans like can solve without going back to some of these atrociously hard CAPTCHAs like from the past that they were very entertaining if you're really into solving CAPTCHAs, but they are not great if you're just trying to get something shipped to your home, right? So that's for sure an area like that everyone is looking like and investigating. But I think the part that's super exciting is if you think of the journey of someone building and managing a customer identity application, you have an app and you want to add like login, sign up, the basic flows, right? Personalization, progressive profiling, all things that really make for an app to be really rich. It'll be great when you are able to, instead of having to build that yourself, you have a conversation like with your software, because you just mentioned AI can write code like for you. So you can actually do integration like for your code. We have a serverless component without sort of like going into the details. We have a serverless component like in Auth0 and Customer Identity Cloud. That's essentially a place for you to write very custom code if you want. And I've been playing around or using generative AI to help us, like to help our users like develop like that code integrating with third parties, and it works really well. So that's definitely going to make its way into like how we think of our future. But imagine a world where I'm building my app and the AI asks me back, it's like, what are you going to be your users like? What are your consumers like? Then the app reacts, and the system can react, say, oh, you know what? No, you're wrong. Actually look into your data, and the majority of your customers are on mobile. They are not on web, and they have this type of device characteristic. They'll be a great candidate for passkey as a sign-in like capability. So I think that's where the customer identity world is gonna move. It will allow you to build and iterate on your apps like much faster.
It's funny you mention that because I feel like that is where I've been seeing kind of the most promise for AI for products is, I don't know, a better wizard interface, a better Clippy, in the Microsoft terms, right? It's like Clippy on steroids where, it actually can do some things and infer things with what you're trying to do from an intent perspective. We got a long ways to go. I mean, I'm a huge fan of AI and the promise of it. Certainly, we've got to be careful about how it gets used, and can you trust the model you're using? Does it give you accurate information? What happens if someone poisons your model and it says, oh, well, go off and write this code, and that code has a backdoor in it, right? Would you have enough knowledge to be able to find that within the code itself if we, kind of start to outsource that to the AI itself to let it write? I like it. I think it's a cool idea. I definitely see kind of the promise of where it's going. You mentioned CAPTCHAs and having, more capability to solve those via robot. And it brought to mind a CAPTCHA that I had to solve yesterday. And I don't know if you've seen this, but it's pick all the pictures with cats wearing pirate hats. And 1, adorable, 2, hilarious, and 3, what the, what? It's like, who comes up with these ideas for CAPTCHAs? And yeah, it was 9 pictures of cats. 3 of them were wearing pirate hats. And that's how I proved that I was not a robot. At some point, I'm guessing.
Who comes up with these ideas? You just found the perfect job for me.
We should probably do that as a lighter note at some point, is like ending the show on design the worst possible CAPTCHA, because I feel like there's a space for this. I'm taking us off on a little tangent for a second, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with the password game that's been making the rounds on like Twitter and LinkedIn and things like that, where you have to come up with a new password, and it just gets increasingly ridiculous, the rules that you need to follow. I can't give credit where credit's due right now because I don't have it in front of me, but it's absolutely brilliant. It's like, oh, you need a number. Oh, you need a letter. You need a special character. Oh, it needs to be the 5th day of the month, right? It needs to not be a pattern. You need to include our logo in it. Things like that.
It'd be great if it said it had to be at least 8 characters, but there were more than 8 different types of characters it needed to contain.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Jimmy, if you haven't seen it, I'll send you the link to it. And I'll probably find it and put it in the show notes. But it's a work of art, I feel like, as an identity person, seeing what caused someone to do that. But tangent over. Let's talk a little bit more about the future of CIAM. You kind of talked a little bit, Cassio, of some of the things that you kind of see coming through on the experience. But are there any other trends, advancements? Is there something beyond large language models that we should be thinking about as, hey, this might be something we see in the future?
I believe there's a lot of shorter-ish, I'll say, term improvements that they may not sound astounding from like the technology that supports them, but customer identity have not caught up with with some of that yet. First is basic biometrics, right? When I use my work computer, like because of company policy, of course, I use biometrics like to sign in. Same thing on my phone. And the higher, if you think of financial services, some financial services allow you already like to enable your Face ID like on the Apple ecosystem if you're there, or the equivalent in Android. But the adoption is being lukewarm in general, like across the industry. And the opportunity there is huge, because back to why customer identity matters, it only matters if you're signing up more customers if they're coming back, if they're loyal like to you. If not, then it's just a login box, right? Like you just do the minimum to keep it going. But everyone knows that's not the case. So we are very excited with what's happening around passkey and what that could mean in terms of the next level of adoption, because FIDO biometrics, WebAuthn, to nerd out like for a second here, the adoption wasn't as good as everyone anticipated it would be. And there's all sorts of challenges. You have to re-enroll like in every app, in every device. Now passkey syncs back to your iCloud account if you're like an Apple user, or to Google Drive if you're Android. So all of that will help a lot, we believe. So that's one that we think can make a huge difference for like in customer identity. The second part that I think is very exciting, and it's taking a little bit of time to get to where it is now, is this whole space of verifiable credentials. And a couple of years ago, with during the hype of crypto and blockchain, it was all about decentralized identity and like sovereign identity and all this interesting, like sort of like solutions looking for problems, if you will. But things are crystallizing now in more tangible and actual solutions that the folks need. Mobile driver's license in the US, the standards are moving, states are adopting it, the large platforms are embracing it. And outside of the US, there's a lot of government identity already, like being done electronically, like Estonia, parts of Australia, like a few things in Canada. I mean, lots in the European Union, right? Lots of countries in the European Union, the Nordics in particular, have adopted that. That part I find super like exciting, because you combine that with or even without like biometrics, but the ability that now your identity is not your password on website A and your social like on B, but that you can carry that with you and you can use that anywhere, and is guaranteed by an authority that's again, without getting into politics, right? In other parts of the world, it's easy to have a central authority issuing documents to everyone. In other parts of the world, maybe like more problematic. But we are very excited like about that notion, like in where and the potential that this has to solve a lot of this identity fragmentation that's out there.
Yeah, it feels like the identity proofing wave that's coming. I truly do believe it's going to be a wave. Has such a great potential to minimize or reduce the amount of fraud that happens, the amount of account takeovers that happen, things like that. I also think about this mobile driver's license. I think, I think it was the state of Alabama is kind of like leading the charge right now in terms of, they've got something actually in production that is more than just a picture of your driver's license, right? It actually is something that you can board an airplane, get through TSA, travel, and at the same time has that backwards compatibility for where basically the person on the other end, or the entity on the other end, only has the ability to work with that picture. I guess my concern is that my concern, but I'm also hopeful. So if we have 50 different implementations, all with their own nuances, that seems like could be kind of a headache. But at the same time, it kind of creates a competition where you hope maybe 10 years down the road, you get one that you get the features, the best features, and they all kind of rise to the top. And eventually everybody does it the same way. And the way they do it is they took all the best. Now, the realist in me says, yeah, that's probably not how it's going to work. But at the same time, I'm kind of hopeful. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I believe we've been following that problem very, very closely in the particularly in terms of mobile driver's license or MDL. So there's emerging standards like around it, and we believe we see things converging like in there. So we may end up with something that's it's much more integrated and consistent than like 50 states, like each one working like their own way. So it started in a very sort of like unconverge, and now things seem to be like moving in the right direction. And the reason potentially not the only reason, but the fact that now the use case you describe is, of course, I think the sort of the most um, potentially like simple one to understand, which is boarding a plane or just verifying who I am. But there are a whole bunch of other needs that some parts of the world are now making mandatory. Like age verification, I think is a great one, right? Like the days where you go to like a website that sells like I don't know, like booze, and you just say, "Are you over 18?" Like, yeah, sure. Like there are countries that are coming down and say like, no, 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 the onus is on you. You have to prove that the person on the other side is. And how would you do that other than some weird consent that your parents click for you? Like, so the mobile driver's license problem, the ID problem, comes very handy, like to solve that. You're going to have a much larger number of verifiers, like than just the airport like problem or this like physical like presentation like of your identity. You have the address verification problem too. Like, are you in the location like where you claim like to be? So now you're correlating potentially your cell phone location like with the address like from your document. I think all of that is forcing like folks to think of that done in a much larger scale versus a whole bunch of ad hoc deployments.
Yeah. I think you're bringing up such an interesting topic. And we've talked about this on the podcast a lot because I kind of wonder, to get to that, don't we have to have some kind of reader on the other end? So I've got my mobile device. It's got all of the information, my birth date, etc., which would you do the calculation, are you 18, are you 21? What if I'm also pulled over by a police officer and he needs my insurance registration and my driver's license? What if he says, well, unlock your phone, give me your phone? Now he's reading my emails, my text messages, and I don't want that. He or she, by the way. But there seems like I should be able to bump it or, do some kind of like lesser access to my device that they can get the information they need, and it's probably some kind of reader. So I wonder, is that problem going to be solved? Because I think if there's a hardware part of the solution, then it comes slower, even though there's more and more places now where you can do Apple Pay or Google Pay. It's just starting to be built into the credit card readers. But look, that did take a long time to get as far as we are, and it's not everywhere yet. So
Yeah, the no, 100%. The devices have the capability, right? Like near field communications or like Bluetooth or whatever like that is. They've had it for some time. In payments, you just mentioned there, but there's kind of like a simpler way to do it, which is like your system could just produce a QR code, like too, right? Like then, like in that, which is how like you scan your boarding pass, like in most airports right now, right? Just squeeze that thing in, the thing takes your QR code. You could think of a case too where you pull up your phone. So maybe daydreaming like this a little bit. You pull up your phone, like there's an officer like by the window. There's like, okay, what do you want to share? You want to share number? Like I want to share my driver's license, QR code. He pulls up his phone, like takes a picture of that, like the system process shows like the verification that the identity is valid, right? That's one of the magics of QR code, right? It allows it to triangulate a lot of that information access.
yeah, just a little side, and I'm not going to ask you to pontificate on this, but I have always been wondering, okay, what's coming after the phone? I tried the wristwatch. Maybe it's a set of glasses. But what I keep coming back to is this kind of feels perfect. It's a little screen that I walk around with, a little computer that I walk around with. And maybe this isn't the perfect size, the perfect weight, but I feel like this form factor kind of feels perfect for me. So I don't know if we're moving on from this, but I did want to ask you one more question before we kind of shift into our close out on a later note. But I have a lot of folks, friends in the industry who ask me, hey, I'm getting started in the CIM space, and they're just starting to explore it for their organization or trying to develop their strategic approach. And for somebody who's like new to the space, what recommendations would you have for them, or what advice would you give them?
I believe when I put my product hat for for a minute here, but looking at the problem from the lens of a product person, from a product manager, what are the outcomes that you're trying to, what are you trying to get? Because if you start to look from the point of view of oh, I have an identity problem, like I'm going to look at identity platform, and then the next you have a 600,000 question RFP with everything you can possibly think that you'll ever need in there, instead of are you trying to, is your marketing team on your case because like signups like are going down, like your customers are complaining, they are pinging your contact center, like it's blowing up your cost, it's delaying purchases. Are you gonna try to launch a new product and your current identity doesn't do what your teams need? Security, maybe sometimes that's the problem, like you being under attack, like lots of credential stuffing or whatever type of attack. I think zooming in on what the outcome that you're trying to, and then work backwards from there. But is an advice that you maybe could argue that helps, like every time we're trying to solve a complex problem. And then two more things that come to mind. One is we always advise clients, and being again a product person, pick small battles, like progressive process, like improvement, like in that big bang migrations, like we all be in identity for some time. Every time we have to move 100 million identities from system A from system B on like over the course of one maintenance window, those things are hard, very hard to do it. So pick an app, pick an experience, start with that, and then move from keep iterating like from that. And the last part is you won't be able to anticipate tomorrow's like needs perfectly. So think of flexibility and extensibility of like whatever you're designing, whatever you're licensing, whatever you're building, because if you end up with something that is too rigid, you're going to be over like yet another migration 2 years down the road. So you need something that is extensible for you to stay remain flexible from that point of view.
I love all those tips because they jive right on with what I'm thinking. It's like, okay, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? Okay, try anything in identity takes a lot of effort. It could be even a small change. Maybe it's even just not even a huge technical change, but it could be a massive communications change or challenge, right? To make sure you have all your users be aware of it, what's going on, how are we going to do this? How are we communicating it? There's so many different variables that come into play. So I love the idea of figuring out what are you actually trying to do? Because I've seen a lot of RFPs in my time with a lot of really dumb questions that don't make any sense. They're looking for like this holy grail product that will do the authentication, and it will do 48 different methods of MFA, 3 of which that don't exist yet, 2 of which the security industry has said you shouldn't even be using those anymore as of like 10 years ago. And you end up with this behemoth of an RFP that you will never find a product that matches what you think you need. And I love having conversations with folks like this where it's like, hey, let's be realistic here. What are you trying to do? What are your use cases? What are you trying to solve for? What makes sense? What is available in the market today that you can take advantage of? Can you leverage open standards, right? I mean, things like SAML, OpenID Connect, SCIM, things like that, where, you've got some better interoperability. Is that going to solve everything? No, but at least it gives you kind of a starting point. So I love everything that you just said, because it's like, I'm like, right on, Cassio, you do it, man.
Great.
Jim, you were talking about the next form factor, and I had to think about this for a second while you were asking a question, because I remember I had heard something. There's the Apple goggles, for lack of a better word, the Vision Pro, right, that they announced like a few weeks ago. Is $3,000 behemoth that you're putting on your face. Looks cool. Definitely not a mass market thing. One thing that you should look at is this thing called Humane. It's a pin that you wear. It's an AI, of course, because everything's AI now. But it's a pin that you wear, sort of like, on kind of like your chest. And it's a voice assistant. And when you need it to show you something, it projects something, and you hold your hand in front of it, and all of a sudden your hand becomes a display. really interesting. Have a lot of questions about how this worked. They did a TED talk recently, but it got me thinking when you talked about like what's the next form factor. I was like, yeah, we've had slab phones now for what, 20 years, 30 years at this point. The flip is coming back and with different types of folding, origami phones that are out there now. But it was interesting. I was thinking about what is that next thing. And if large language models take off the way that I think people are thinking, maybe that's it. Maybe it is some sort of earpiece that you wear that is just a voice assistant, and that's just it. Maybe it's built into a
Jeff,
hearing
I've
aid.
got to
or something.
ask you this question. So, Apple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love Apple. I love my iPhone. I guess I love the ecosystem, but sometimes I wonder why is our Apple products so popular? Some of the products I love, like I love my MacBook. Like I said, I love my iPhone. But have you used Siri lately? And it's like you could not say, "Hey Siri, play me that song that goes like doot doot doot." And by the way, my Siri just ringed in my ear.
Everyone's did.
Yeah, so it has no clue what you're talking about. Oh, let me look that up on the internet for you.
Yeah.
So it's doing that. It's playing some terrible song now, which I didn't want to hear.
Yeah, you're gonna get a copyright strike for us. Yeah, I feel like AI, Apple has not, at least to date, publicly got on the boat for AI in the way that everyone else has. Google has, Microsoft definitely has. I mean, they're all in on the open AI. I think they're an investor, of course. I don't know, because Siri is not an Apple product. Siri was an acquisition that they made. Siri used to be
5 years ago, though, right?
I think it's like 10 years ago at this point. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's not an Apple product. It is now, but it didn't start that way. It was an app that you ran on your phone, and it was, a clever little way to like do little voice things. And I use Siri. I use it almost every day for mundane tasks. Set a timer, remind me this. It's good at that kind of thing.
But you almost have to know the exact language. You have to speak. You have to enunciate very clearly. I mean, it's bad. It's not good.
I agree with you. I think I think of the major players in this space between Google, Microsoft, and Apple, I think they're definitely in last place, and it's not even close. I mean, even Google Bard, which had a really rough start, getting an answer wrong in a demo with press is not a great way to launch your product. It is still head and shoulders ahead of, I think, what, again, I've seen publicly. Now, I don't work for Apple. I'm just a stupid podcaster by night and an identity person by day. So this is purely my own speculation. It would really surprise me if they don't have something working behind the scenes that is a lot better, because this is what Apple's strength is they're not really all the time being like this innovative company. What they are is they're really good at polishing existing ideas and making it rock solid. They didn't invent the laptop. They didn't invent iPhone, the cellular phone or the slab phone, things like that. But they're really good at taking existing ideas and really figuring out how do you make this thing work together. The ecosystem pull that Apple has built is amazing. I have a watch, a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a TV. I don't have a speaker yet, but I have the ecosystem and I get it. Things just work. If I prefer Windows myself as an OS. I think it's, for me, I'm much more comfortable. I can get more done with it, but I love the ecosystem that Apple has built, and it just works together. And I see a lot of identity work behind the scenes to make that happen, right? I have a device IDs. I have my accounts that are synchronizing. Cassio, you mentioned passkey syncing right in iCloud. It's like magic. It just works. I use Android 2 to 3 times a year to try it out and see how it is. They've caught up. I think the hardware is there. I think the OS is a little bit fragmented because of the open source nature of Android. But for the most part, I would say they're pretty equivalent. But going back to the AI thing, Siri is not great. I think it'll get a little bit better as they roll out the next versions of iOS, iPad OS, all the different Apple OSs that are coming out here the next couple months. But I guess that's a long way for me to tell you. Yeah, I don't think Siri Siri is winning any war, any battles or awards right now. But it would surprise me that Apple doesn't have something that they are in the back watching, polishing, taking notes. And when it comes out, it's going to be ready for prime time.
There are lots of things that Siri does for you, like that you beyond the voice assistant, right? So all of the integration in between the apps, like if something shows up, like in iMessage, like as it creates like a calendar, like invite, like for you, or like puts an appointment, adds something to your notes. That's all Siri, like that's working exactly to your point, like Jeff is working behind the scenes. It's not the product itself; it's just a component to making that technology better, which is what Apple is masterful like at, right? That's really like they're really good at.
I mean, it's invisible. It runs behind the scenes. I think they're even taking away the need to even say, "Hey Siri." It's just you say a command and it just does it in the background,
just
right?
bark out what you want.
Yeah, exactly. We've had this conversation before, Jim. Like, are you nice to your AIs? Right? It was like, do you write please after your Chat GPT prompt? At some point, I think it's an interesting conversation to have. Is like, what is the etiquette with dealing with your AI versus someone else's AI, or whatever we end up calling it. But
I just feel like I'd rather be nice. I was taught as a youngster, be nice to everybody. You can never say thank you and please too many times, right? You can't offend somebody by saying thank you an extra time when it wasn't appropriate. No one's going to have their feelings hurt over that. So just go for it.
Yeah, be nice. Be a good human being. It's not hard.
The one thing I'll say about this that's like a fun story. Like we're not into voice assistants at home. Like I turn all of that off for privacy reasons. I'm a little bit obsessed about it. But we have one, and once in a while, like I bring my daughter, like just to ask questions and play with that. We spend most of our lives in Canada, so every time we refer to the assistant, it was like, "Hey, can you please?" And then at one point, it's said like, "Oh, you Canadians are so nice." You actually said that. So somebody programmed that in the assistant to say that. That was pretty funny.
That's a clever
There's
use
one other like silly point that I had to ask you about. So there's supposed to be this cage match, right? Again, between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, right?
Yeah.
And I was kind of like on the fence on like who could win, and I didn't know. But I saw a picture of Mark Zuckerberg the other day. I was like, dude, Elon Musk better back out of this thing. It might be embarrassing to back out. This would get more embarrassing if he just like completely gets destroyed by Zuckerberg. I mean, that dude's a beast.
Yeah, and he's a judo person. I don't know. I mean, two billionaires yelling at each other on a stupid social media thing. Whatever.
You're going to watch it.
Yeah. Maybe Zuck takes him physically. Maybe Elon builds some sort of Tesla robot to fight on his behalf as like an exoskeleton armor, like Ripley and Aliens or something like that. I don't know. I'm getting really, really crazy now. All right, let's start to wrap things up because I want to make sure that Cassio gets out of here on time. Cassio, I know you're a big reader, and I thought we'd take today's lighter note and talk about maybe a book recommendation, something that people can take back and help them in either their identity life, their professional life, something on those lines where you can say, hey, you know what? That was a good book. I appreciate it and understand it. And there was actually some things in there that I could take back as kind of nuggets to help me be a better human being, Jim, right? Would be nicer, right? That kind of thing. Do you have any recommendations along that line? Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a movie or something like that. So I don't want to limit it to just book, but let's just call it a media recommendation.
Media recommendation that will make you a better human. That's like a pretty tall order. Let me think about it. No, there's I'm really into behavioral psychology. Like sometimes I feel myself like as a frustrated like psychologist researcher. I love that space. And there's a book I read probably over 10 years ago, and then I always pick that book back up. Like at times, it's called Thinking Fast and Slow from Dan Kahneman. You can think of that book as sort of like he's the person who did a lot of research in the 60s and 70s around biases, right? So recency bias, like sample bias, like he crystallized those concepts and brought those concepts into popular culture. Besides being the book is incredibly well written, like it's so easy to consume. And as a product person, you have to be aware like of your biases, right? You're talking to a customer, you're looking at specific research. If you don't situate in terms of the biases, that's everything is biased. Like nothing is totally neutral. particularly if you have watched like US television, you know what I'm talking about. But you have to be aware of biases in there. So that super helpful, both like in what I found like at work, personal life, under like understanding what's happening in terms of politics, economics, like etc. So that's one of my sort of top picks for sure.
That's interesting. I just looked it up here. It's on Amazon, of course. So I'll put a link in our show notes. But for those people who are Kindle Unlimited subscribers, it's part of that subscription. So it doesn't even cost anything if you're already paying for that membership. So I have already started the download to my device, and I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Jim, how about yourself? Any media recommendations on how to be a better human or something like that?
Well, no, I don't know if this makes you a better human, but when I saw that this was the question we were going to cover was a book recommendation, I started looking through my library and I dusted off this one, which is a Malcolm Gladwell book called Outliers. And I realized I hadn't read it in a long time, but it has some like really cool insights. I also saw it was like, number one best-selling author of The Tipping Point, which is another Malcolm Gladwell book that I also highly recommend. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell, like I don't know much about him personally, but he writes some great books. So The Outliers was the idea that there are certain situations that lead people into certain results. And so it was like the one example that was used was when you looked at NHL players, like some high percentage of them were born in a 2 or 3 month period, which just happened to be the end of the age cutoff for hockey leagues in Canada or in most countries, right? So it was like May, June, July were the birth dates of like 80% of NHL players because they were the older kids, and the older kids got more attention early because they were the best players. And so at each level, they got more and more attention. And then the smaller kids got weeded out through the process. And I could, as somebody who coached baseball for youth, you can kind of see like the bigger kids at that very earliest stage have a much bigger advantage, and they succeed more and enjoy the sport more because it's like, oh my gosh, this baseball game is like really easy. I was like, well, it's very helpful that you're also the biggest kid on the field. I don't know if you knew that, but so, it's like insights like that. So this is like a good while you're on vacation kind of book to read. It gets you thinking about the world in a different way. What about you, Jeff?
I like that. I remember you mentioning that at one point. I did add it to our show notes. So we'll have a whole bunch of links in our show notes. We'll have Thinking Fast and Slow, Outliers, The Story of Success. I got a real one, and I got a not real one, but my real one is 1 Minute Manager. I am not a reader who likes to read like manuals. I like stories. And it's like this story basically of this guy who is on the search for like the perfect manager. And so it's a lot of different little sort of like scenes and things that talk about, how do you manage people? How do you manage goals, praisings, reprimands, kind of all this stuff. But it's told in more of a story format, almost like the Phoenix Project, Jim, that you and I have talked about in the past and things like that. So it's kind of a quick, easy read. The dark side in me would recommend The Count of Monte Cristo, just from a revenge standpoint. Be patient, wait for your time, and then strike. Right? But no, 1 Minute Manager is the one that I'm going to recommend, and I'll throw that into our show notes. So,
isn't there like a sandwich called a Monte Cristo?
There is. It is there's a couple of different ways that you can prepare it, but it's basically like a ham and cheese of different varieties, sometimes Swiss, etc. It can be served on French toast. Usually, the component
go on.
Yeah, exactly right. It's deep fried of some variety, which, hey, I'm all in for that for sure. And it's usually served with like a jam of some sort, either raspberry or maybe strawberry. I think kind of the one that I've had the most is it's basically like a deep fried sandwich using French toast as the bread, ham, cheese, and then a raspberry jam that you basically dip it in. And yes, it's as good as it sounds. if that's your thing, and it's also as healthy as it sounds. If that's your thing.
I do hear Siri calling your cardiologist right now, Jim, just in case.
Yeah, I
Behind the
was gonna
scene,
say,
working
you have to
invisibly.
Pop a few statin and then go ahead and have yourself a Monte Cristo.
It'll pop up. It seems like you're about to have a heart attack. Would you like me to call an ambulance for you? That's when we'll truly be ahead of the game. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Another long episode, but I really enjoyed the conversation, Cassio. So thanks for being part of it. I did mention that we're going to have a whole bunch of links in our show notes. How you connect with Cassio on LinkedIn, obviously for people who want to learn more about Okta as well. I got a message as we were talking here about the Auth0 April Fool's joke that you guys played several years back. It was 2001 of CRAPTCHAs. So I'll put a link to that. The password game, the book recommendations, of course, our discount code for the Authenticate conference, and then links for people to connect with Jim and myself. So we'll go ahead and leave it there. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com, Twitter at idacpodcast, Mastodon at idacpodcast, at infosec.exchange. Definitely send in those recommendations, ideas, questions, etc. Please keep those things coming in. Jim is nodding in agreement. And yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, all of those fun social things that helps us grow the show and keep putting content out. So Cassio, thank you so much for your time and joining us this week. Jim, as always, thanks for your time. And we'll go ahead and talk with everyone else in the next one.
Thank you both. It was great.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.